Dallas, Texas, April 1973. A narrow backstage hallway that smelled like cigarette smoke and spilled beer. Concrete walls painted black years ago, now chipped and stained. Water damage had left brown streaks near the ceiling. The bass from the stage vibrated through the floor, a low pulse you felt in your chest before you heard it. Stevie Ray Vaughan stood against the wall, clutching a battered Stratocaster case. 15 years old, all elbows and knees, wearing jeans 2 sizes too big, and a shirt his mother had ironed that morning. His hair fell across his face, and he kept pushing it back, a nervous habit he'd have for the rest of his life. The case in his hands was covered in stickers from music stores. His palms were sweating. He'd been planning this for weeks. His father knew a sound engineer who knew a promoter who owed someone a favor. The chain of connections had gotten Stevie backstage at a small blues club where Jimi Hendrix was playing an unannounced show. Not a stadium, not a festival. Just a Tuesday night in Dallas, and somehow, impossibly, Jimi Hendrix was here. Stevie had practiced what he'd say. He'd rehearsed the questions. He'd imagined the conversation 100 times. He'd ask about technique, about gear, about how Jimi got those sounds that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the guitar itself. And maybe, if the moment was right, he'd ask if he could touch Jimi's Stratocaster. Just once. Just to know what it felt like. But when the door opened and Jimi walked through, every word Stevie had practiced disappeared. Jimi looked tired, not the wild electric presence from the posters and album covers, just tired. His shirt was soaked with sweat sticking to his chest. His afro was slightly flattened on one side. He walked slowly, like someone carrying weight that nobody else could see, like someone who'd played 1,000 shows and couldn't remember why he'd started. People immediately surrounded him, a woman with a clipboard, 2 men in suits, someone trying to hand him a drink. Jimi took none of it. He nodded, said nothing, and moved toward a folding chair in the corner of the room. Stevie started to move forward, his heart hammering. But someone stepped between them, then someone else. The backstage area wasn't large, maybe 20 people total, but suddenly it felt crowded. Bodies between him and Jimi, voices filling the space. Jimi sat down, leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. His face was blank, not peaceful, just absent. Like he'd learned to go somewhere else while his body stayed in the room. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Stevie had imagined Jimi would be energized, talkative, maybe even notice the skinny kid with the guitar case and ask his name. Instead, Jimi looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, looked like he wanted to be no one at all. Stevie retreated to his corner, still holding his case. He'd wait. Maybe in a few minutes, when people cleared out, he'd approach. Maybe he'd find the courage then. 10 minutes passed, then 20. People talked around Jimi, but not to him. Jimi didn't open his eyes, didn't engage. Stevie watched the whole time, trying to will himself to move, to speak, to do anything except stand there like a statue. Then Jimi reached for a guitar, not his famous white Stratocaster. Just a beat-up acoustic that had been leaning against the wall, probably belonging to someone in the opening band. Jimi pulled it onto his lap without opening his eyes. His hands moved to the tuning pegs. Nobody in the room noticed. The conversations continued. Someone laughed. Someone lit a cigarette. But Stevie noticed. Stevie stopped breathing. Jimi tuned the guitar by ear, each string adjusted with small, precise movements. No tuner, no reference pitch, just his fingers on the pegs in his ear telling him when it was right. It took maybe 30 seconds. Then he started playing. The notes were quiet, simple blues, nothing flashy, nothing that would make someone stop a conversation and turn their head. But Stevie heard every note like it was the only sound in the world. Jimi wasn't performing, he was breathing. The guitar wasn't an instrument in his hands. It was an extension of whatever was happening inside him that needed to come out. His eyes stayed closed. His face showed nothing. But his fingers moved across the strings like they were speaking a language Stevie had been trying to learn his whole life and had never quite understood until this moment. His left hand barely moved. Small shifts, economical, nothing wasted. His right hand rested on the strings in a way that looked casual, but Stevie could see the precision. The way his thumb anchored on the low E string, the way his fingers found the exact strings without looking. This wasn't the wild, explosive Jimmy from the posters. This was something quieter, more essential. Stevie had spent 3 years learning technique. He'd practiced scales until his fingers bled. He'd memorized solos from records, trying to sound just like Albert King, just like B.B. King. He thought that was what mattered. Getting it right, playing it clean, impressing people. But Jimmy wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was barely aware anyone was in the room. He played a bend, held it, let it sustain until it faded into silence. Then another note, simple, patient, like he had all the time in the world. Stevie realized he was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away, because he understood something he couldn't have put into words yet. Something about why you pick up a guitar in the first place. Something about the difference between playing for people and playing because you can't not play. Jimmy bent a string, and the note wavered, almost broke, then held. It sounded like pain. It sounded like peace. It sounded like both at once. Stevie wanted to move closer, wanted to see Jimmy's fingers on the fretboard, study the exact placement, the angle, the pressure. But he couldn't move, because moving would break whatever this was. This wasn't a lesson. This wasn't a performance. This was something private that Stevie just happened to be witnessing, and he knew, even at 15, that interrupting it would be a kind of violence. The guitar had a nick in the wood near the sound hole. Stevie could see it from where he stood. Jimmy's thumb rested near it as he played, and Stevie wondered how many guitars Jimmy had played in his life, how many beaten-up acoustics in backstage rooms when nobody was watching, how many moments like this had happened that nobody knew about, because they weren't the moments that made it into magazines or onto concert recordings. Jimmy played for maybe 3 minutes. Then he stopped, set the guitar down gently, leaned back, closed his eyes again. The whole room had kept talking through it. Nobody had noticed except Stevie. Someone called Stevie's name. He turned. A security guard was gesturing. "Hey, kid, you can't be back here." Stevie tried to explain, fumbled for words, looked back at where Jimmy had been sitting. The chair was empty. Jimmy was gone. Probably slipped out through a side door while Stevie was arguing with security. The guitar was still there, leaning against the wall. Stevie left, walked out into the Dallas night with his Stratocaster case, got into his father's truck, and sat in silence the whole ride home. His father asked if he'd met Jimmy. Stevie said no. His father said that was too bad, maybe next time. Stevie didn't respond. That night, alone in his room, Stevie opened his guitar case and pulled out his Stratocaster. He sat on the edge of his bed and just held it for a while. The room was dark except for the street light coming through the window. He could hear his parents talking downstairs, the television on, but everything had changed. He thought about all the hours he'd spent trying to play fast, trying to play loud, trying to play impressive. He'd measured his progress in speed, in complexity, in how many people stopped to listen when he played at school talent shows. He'd thought that was the path. That was how you became a guitarist. You got better and better until people had no choice but to pay attention. But Jimmy hadn't been trying to get attention. Jimmy had been alone with a guitar, and the attention didn't matter. The room didn't matter. The people didn't matter. What mattered was whatever needed to come out, and the guitar was just the way it came out. Stevie realized he'd been playing guitar for all the wrong reasons. Not wrong exactly, but incomplete. He'd been playing to become something, to earn something, to prove something, but Jimmy just was something, and the guitar was how that something breathed. Then he started playing, not the flashy runs he'd been practicing, not the solos he'd memorized, just notes, simple notes, playing for nobody, playing because that's what the feeling in his chest needed to become. His fingers found a blues progression, basic, something he'd played 1,000 times. But this time he played it differently, slower, listening to each note sustain, letting silence exist between the notes, not filling every space with sound. For the first time in 3 years of playing guitar, it felt honest. It felt like breathing. 10 years later, Stevie Ray Vaughan sat in a radio studio in Austin, Texas. His album Texas Flood had just gone gold. Every music magazine was calling him the next Jimi Hendrix. The comparison followed him everywhere, and he never quite knew how to respond to it. The interviewer asked the question everyone asked. Did you ever meet Jimi Hendrix? Stevie paused. 5 seconds of dead air. Then he smiled, and the smile had something sad in it. I saw him once, Stevie said. Backstage. Dallas, 1973. I was 15. I'd been planning for weeks what I'd say to him. I had questions about technique, about tone, about everything. But when I saw him, I froze. Couldn't say a word. And then he picked up a guitar and just played. Not for me, not for anyone in that room. Just played. And I realized I'd been asking the wrong questions my whole life. The interviewer leaned forward. What do you mean? I wanted to know how he played, but what I needed to understand was why. He didn't play to be Jimi Hendrix. He played because that's what he was. Music wasn't something he did. It was something he couldn't not do. I watched him for maybe 3 minutes, and he never knew I was there. But those 3 minutes changed everything for me. How so? Stevie looked down at his hands. I'd been trying to impress people, trying to be good enough, trying to earn the right to call myself a guitarist. But Jimmy showed me it doesn't work like that. You don't play to become something. You play because you already are something, and the guitar is just how it comes out. I never got to thank him. He died 3 years before I'd have had the words to explain what he taught me, but every time I play, I'm trying to honor what I saw in that room. Not the flash, not the fame, just the purity of it. The interview moved on, but that answer became the one clip people remembered. Radio stations played it. Guitar magazines quoted it. And every time someone asked Stevie about Jimmy after that, he'd tell some version of that story. The kid who watched Jimi Hendrix for 3 minutes and learned more than a lifetime of lessons could have taught him. Stevie Ray Vaughan died in a helicopter crash in August 1990, 20 years after Jimmy. At his memorial service, someone played a recording of Stevie covering Little Wing, Jimmy's song. If you listen closely to that version, you can hear it. The influence isn't in the notes. It's in the intention behind them. The way Stevie plays like he's breathing. Like he's alone in a room with a guitar and nobody watching. Like music isn't performance. It's prayer. Jimi Hendrix never knew a 15-year-old kid watched him play an old acoustic guitar in a backstage room in Dallas. Never knew that kid would spend the next 17 years trying to embody what he'd witnessed in those 3 minutes. Never knew his legacy wasn't just in the stadiums and the albums and the fire and the chaos. It was also in quiet moments, in tired moments, in moments when he played for nobody and changed someone's life anyway. 2 guitarists, 1 moment, 0 words, and a lesson that echoed for decades after both of them were gone. Stevie never got to tell Jimmy what he'd learned, but he spent his entire career showing it. Every note he played after that night in Dallas was a thank you Jimmy never heard. And maybe that's the point. The deepest influences aren't the ones we acknowledge. They're the ones we carry so deep inside us that they become part of how we breathe.